This video was made possible thanks to CuriosityStream. Watch TLDR ad-free and get exclusive videos from us by signing up to the CuriosityStream Nebula bundle deal at curiositystream.com/TLDREU. If you search the word Ukraine on YouTube, the second most viewed video is a speech by John Mearsheimer at the University of Chicago, titled, "Why is Ukraine the West's Fault?" At the time of writing, Mearsheimer's speech has been viewed an astonishing 8 million times, which is especially impressive given that it's 75 minutes and pretty academic, and it's only second in popularity to Ukraine's 2021 Eurovision entry. While Mearsheimer's opinion isn't mainstream, it's clearly not a fringe opinion either. Politicians of all stripes have recently taken to Twitter to blame Russia's invasion of Ukraine on NATO expansion. And given that this opinion has gained some traction and is in itself pretty interesting, we thought it would be worth doing a video on. So we're going to split this video into two parts, pre-Crimea and post-Crimea. For this, we're actually going to use Mearsheimer's article rather than his speech, focusing on a 13-page article on the topic in Foreign Affairs. In the second part of the video, we're going to argue that while there's space for debate about the appropriate division of blame pre-Crimea, post-Crimea, Putin only has himself to blame. So let's get into the first part of the video. The Ukraine crisis pre-Crimea. As we said, most of this video is going to deal with Mearsheimer's article, which was published in October 2014, and therefore mostly deals with the pre-Crimea tensions. As we read him, Mearsheimer makes three claims in his article. 1. The West made a mistake in not heeding Putin's warnings. 2. That Putin's security concerns are legitimate, or at least more legitimate than the West imagines. And 3. That the West's Ukraine policy is in no one's interest. Let's start with that first claim. Mearsheimer claims that the West has made a mistake in ignoring Putin's demands vis-à-vis Ukraine. Despite protestations from Moscow, the West went ahead with Westernising Ukraine via NATO expansion, EU expansion in the form of the Eastern Partnership, and investment in civic institutions. Now, there is some truth to this. Clearly, the West didn't take Putin's threats sufficiently seriously, and in retrospect, Europe's energy dependence on Russia looks a bit naive. Nonetheless, the West might argue that it's not so much that they didn't hear Putin's demands, but they considered them illegitimate. Putin was asking for a veto over Ukraine's foreign policy, and the West just weren't willing to accept this. Which leads us nicely onto Mearsheimer's second argument, that Russia's security concerns were legitimate. Mearsheimer motivates this claim with three subclaims. Firstly, he argues that Ukraine has historically acted as a necessary buffer between the Napoleonic France, Imperial Germany, and Nazi Germany, and so it's unsurprising that Putin wants to avoid it becoming, quote, Western. Second, Mearsheimer argues that America has similar security interests. It's hard to imagine the US, for example, tolerating Canada or Mexico joining a China-led military alliance. Third, Mearsheimer argues that this is just realpolitik. States will just defend their security interests, even if it means violating the West's so-called liberal principles, and we shouldn't see that as illegitimate. That's just what states do. Mearsheimer's argument here isn't watertight, though. Let's start with his first claim about Ukraine's historical military importance. For starters, the history is a bit questionable. Napoleon actually crossed today's Belarus, not Ukraine. But more importantly, how is the history of Ukraine actually relevant to Putin's security concerns? South America is of great historical importance to Spain, but so what? Lots of countries share military histories. This doesn't mean that they get to have a say in one another's foreign policy. Mearsheimer's second claim is more interesting though, that the US behaves in a similar way. This is pretty much undeniably true. The US wouldn't accept Mexico joining a China-led military alliance, and in 1962, Kennedy resisted the Soviet deployment of ICBMs in Cuba. Mearsheimer notes another instance of Western hypocrisy in the West's support for the 2014 Maidan uprising, which, to be fair, did essentially amount to a coup against a democratically elected president. This sort of reasoning, it's alright because the West did it first, is very popular among Russia contrarians. But it's just bad reasoning. Just because the West did it first doesn't mean that it's right. Instead, it might just be that it wasn't right in either case. It's not alright that Russia thinks it can veto Ukraine's foreign policy, and it's not alright that America thinks it can, hypothetically, veto Canada's foreign policy. Essentially, Mearsheimer's argument here only works if we accept the implicit premise that the West is perfect, and, well, most people just don't believe this. Mearsheimer's third claim, that this is just what states do and we should accept it, is only plausible from a realist perspective. Liberals would instead argue that we should expect states to abide by rules-based order, and a failure to do so incurs blame. Essentially, the plausibility of Mearsheimer's appeal to realism will depend on whether you fall on the realist-liberal axis. But you get the point. There's definitely space for debate as to whether Russia's security demands were legitimate. But Mearsheimer ends his essay by arguing that, either way, the West should change its course because its policy of Westernising Ukraine is in no one's interest. Mearsheimer argues that the policy is creating an unnecessary divide between Russia and the West, which is in neither of their interests, as well as claiming that encouraging Ukraine to resist Russia is a bad idea from Ukraine's perspective, because at the end of the day, according to him, the West won't protect Ukraine. Instead, Mearsheimer recommends that Ukraine should become, quote, a neutral buffer akin to Austria in the Cold War. Now, in retrospect, Mearsheimer was clearly onto something. Russia and the West really weren't getting on with one another, to mutual detriment. And, as predicted, Ukraine is currently fighting a war against Russia without direct NATO support. But Putin's recent behaviour makes it questionable as to whether Ukraine could really have ever existed as a neutral buffer. Mearsheimer argues that Putin isn't motivated by Soviet-inspired neo-imperialism, and so will accept a neutral Ukraine. Putin's recent speeches and behaviour certainly suggest otherwise. Essentially, while Mearsheimer's argument looks prescient, it's an open question as to whether Putin would have accepted Ukraine as even a neutral buffer. So that's pre-Crimea. Arguably, there is a debate to be had about the legitimacy of Putin's security concerns and the prudence of the West's Ukraine policy. But post-Crimea, Putin doesn't have a leg to stand on. For starters, even if you think that Putin's security concerns were legitimate, his illegal annexation of Crimea was arguably disproportionate and definitely stupid. This is an important point. Legitimate concerns don't justify a disproportionate response. If your brother kicks you in the shins, you're not justified in shooting him in the face. While there were mitigating circumstances, polls consistently found that the majority of Crimeans wanted to return to Russia, for example, the annexation of Crimea was a flagrant violation of international law, and arguably disproportionate. But perhaps most importantly, it was just stupid. In annexing Crimea, Putin accelerated the westernization of Ukraine, the precise thing he didn't want to happen. This was for two reasons. Firstly, and most obviously, their annexation made Ukrainians wary of Russia, because, well, no one likes having their country invaded and annexed. Pre-Crimea, polls consistently found that less than 25% of people wanted Ukraine to join NATO. After Crimea, that jumped to 50%. But secondly, Putin changed Ukraine's electoral arithmetic. Crimea accounted for 5% of Ukraine's population, and reliably voted for pro-Russian candidates. By annexing Crimea, Putin gave the pro-Western candidates a new electoral edge. You get the point then. We can argue over whether Putin's annexation of Crimea was disproportionate, but, more importantly, it was just really stupid. It made the further westernization of Ukraine, which has been happening since 2014, utterly inevitable. And given this, Putin's argument that the West has left him with no other choice is farcical. Putin's concerns post-Crimea are almost entirely self-inflicted, and his subsequent war with Ukraine is terrifyingly disproportionate and morally appalling. This might sound biased or anti-Russian, but there's literally no plausible moral theory that wouldn't consider Putin's war utterly awful. How Europe and the West will respond now, though, will shape the route forward. Without a clear leader in Europe, it's not obvious what shape that will take, though, as we discussed in our most recent video exclusively on Nebula. You might have heard of them before, but my creator friends and I teamed up to build our own platform where we don't need to worry about demonetization or the algorithm. Over there, you can find all of our latest videos ad-free, and we're also starting to post exclusive Nebula Plus videos over there as well, with our first one already live. It's not just us either. All of our favourite educational creators are there too, like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law, Polymatter, Legal Eagle, Half as Interesting, and many more. But wait, we said this video was brought to you by CuriosityStream, right? Well, as a platform full of the best documentaries available online, they naturally love educational creators like us. And as such, we've worked out a deal whereby if you sign up for CuriosityStream using the link in the description, you'll also get access to Nebula for free. That's not a trial either. You'll have access for as long as you're a CuriosityStream member. To make things even better, for a limited time they're offering a deal where you can get 26% off their already low price, making an entire year of both services less than $15. $15 for all of your favourite educational creators, as well as superb documentaries on CuriosityStream. Signing up at curiositystream.com/TLDREU or clicking the link below not only gets you the deal, but it also directly supports TLDR and other educational content creators on the platform, as well as getting you original content and an ad-free experience.